I'm here today with Marguerita Cheng. She is the CEO of Blue Ocean Global Wealth. Marguerita, today we're going to be talking about empathy. Now, I have found that recently people have had a more difficult time with developing empathy, with showing empathy toward a client. What we've seen in recent generations is that people actually score lower on empathy scores. So this is one of those areas that I think people need a refresher on how to be empathic toward a client. So how do you get started with being better at empathy?
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a topic that is so important to all of us, personally and professionally. So I would say, of course, without question, empathy is really important for a financial planner. We know that we need experience and education and examination and ethics, but the fifth E is empathy. So I would say the first step that we can take is just being present, paying attention. Don't look at your devices, don't fidget. So that's the first step. The second step is to pay attention to nonverbal cues, body language. Third step is to, ask questions. And remember, if you ask questions, you need to be willing and ready to listen to the responses. And then find a connection, right? Find a connection with the clients. And then don't be afraid of silence. And then last but not least, take the time to follow up. When you build that connection and then it leads to more questions, take the time to maybe ask clarifying questions.
So what does it mean to be empathic?
So to be empathic is to be mindful and be sensitive to what that person is feeling and experiencing. So it is about creating a safe space that is judgment-free. Because after all, personal finance is just that, it's personal. It's our individual experiences that shape our money scripts. So to be empathic or empathetic involves taking the time to walk in another person's shoes and see the world from their viewpoint.
And I think to see the world from their viewpoint, you have to understand what their viewpoint is. You can't just make assumptions about how they feel about their finances.
Correct, and I think that's key here. When we start to make assumptions, we are imposing our views and judgments. So it's important to take the time to understand what clients are thinking and experiencing. You don't have to agree with it, but you do need to take the time to understand. One of my mentors early on told me this. He said, Rita, to be successful, you need to know how to convince a client. You know how to be able to talk to someone to become your client. Once they are in your office and talking to you, you need to be able to connect with them, right? If you can't do that, it doesn't mean you're not going to be successful, but that just means you're not going to help the clients get the outcome they want. The other thing that you need to do is you need to understand. You don't have to agree with it. Find out what they're reading. Find out where they're getting their information. Not because you want to judge, but just because the more you know, the more you can help them.
The more you know, the more you can help them. That is such an important insight. And I think many times it's tempting to skip over this period where you're trying to learn more about your client because you feel like, how important is that really? Well, that is pretty important, right?
It absolutely is, and this is exactly what I tell people. I said, the more I know, the more I can help you. If there's something that I ask you and you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, gosh, you know what, I don't know, or I never thought about that. Or if it's uncomfortable, you could say, hey, I'd prefer not to discuss this at this time. I think when clients know that you are coming from a place of care, they feel that connection, and when they feel that connection with you, they start to know that you're on their side. That's how you build trust.
What are some techniques that you can use to help a client feel as if you truly understand who they are and what they're trying to achieve?
So one technique that you can use is you can ask clarifying questions. So don't say, why do you think that? Because that can be put someone on the defense. You could say, hey, tell me about that. Or another way is if someone comes to you, this is an example, and says, you know what, I heard such and such product is not good. Instead of saying, well, what makes you think that? You can ask them, you know, how do you make financial decisions, right? Who is involved? Or so instead of like jumping to the conclusion or jumping to what you think they should do, is ask the clients, you know, how do you make financial decisions? They'll tell you maybe it's spouse, partner, family. So if they come to you with something and you're like, no, that's wrong, that immediately can make the client feel uncomfortable. Whereas you're like, well, tell me about how you go about making financial decisions. What's the process? And then if you need more clarification, would you mind sharing more about that? And so I think that all too often, sometimes we think we should just go right to the recommendation, but there's tremendous value in taking the time to build connections, ask the right questions to help the client get to a better outcome.
So I like that idea of using more of an open-ended type of question. Instead of feeling like you need to answer everything for a client, leave it up to them to explain why it is that they feel a certain way. And then you have more information that you can use to provide greater clarity about a product or a strategy.
Absolutely. And I specifically said about products because imagine if someone says, this is just an example, I heard annuities are terrible. And you say, well, where did you get that? And maybe their dad said that. You don't want to say they're wrong, right? Even though that might not be the case, but this isn't the right forum or time, this is not the right time or place to say that. Another way in which you can have an open-ended question is just ask people, you know, what brings you here today? What has your experience been in working with professional advisors? Instead of saying, have you worked with an advisor before, which is yes or no, a better question is, what has your experience been working with professional advisors? And then they'll tell you, and you can say, if they say no, or rather, if they say yes, that's when you can say, okay, tell me what you liked about it. And this is all the opportunity where you can tell me what you didn't like. And then you as the advisor continue. It's not about being a people pleaser, but disappointment occurs when expectations don't meet outcome. So I want to know what you liked and what you didn't like so that I can help you and your family get the desired outcome or get the outcome that you're looking for. And so when you ask these types of questions, you can see that you're really taking the time to build connections with the client and build trust.
You know, that is such an important point, that it really is all about understanding the client's expectations and then trying to put together some sort of a plan that addresses those expectations rather than simply assuming that you know what the client is looking for. Well, thank you so much, Marguerita, for joining us today. Many important insights.
Thank you so much for having me.